to this panel on entrepreneurship. Before we begin, we were planning on introducing ourselves. So I'm Srinidhi Varadarajan, the moderator of today's panel. Past background, I was a professor at Virginia Tech for 13 years, ran a center there. Built a series of startups, one in California, two in Northern Virginia, then one more in Hollywood. And I had reasonable exits with most of them. Spent some time in large companies like Dell that acquired one of the companies. So entrepreneurship I'm a serial entrepreneur now. So 4 in about 15 years. So it's been a fun life. And our panel here is extremely distinguished. So we're thinking of using this opportunity to answer questions on various topics, things that people have learned over decades of experience. If I might start, Mary, if you'd like to.
Yes, I'm happy to speak. I say good evening to everybody out there. I guess we're all Hokies. I started a number of years ago, was out in Virginia Tech as a faculty member and left the university and started a software company, which I operated quite successfully for about 27 years. I am now running the regional accelerator and mentoring program in the Roanoke-Blacksburg region. And we're working hard to seek out and accelerate technology-based startup companies. And it's a lot of fun. I would say, probably like the rest of you, there might have been easier career paths at times, but it's been a lot of fun and continues to be fun. So happy to share anything I can to help anybody that's considering that path.
Rajat?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rajab Gupta. I'm based out of the Bay Area, have about 18 years of experience in the industry. My career path essentially involved me getting a bachelor's and master's in computer science. I got my master's in computer science and graduated in '99. And after initially starting my career as an engineer and an engineering manager, I went over to the dark side in 2008 and got an MBA, flirted around with consulting and banking and all those things that MBAs typically do, but realized I had too much tech in my DNA. So promptly came back to the industry. And for the last 12 years, I've been at the cusp of product and business. I've had a couple of entrepreneurial strengths. I've done 2 of my own startups. I've worked for a couple of other startups. So really enjoy how different working for a startup is, regardless of whether you're creating one on your own or working for somebody else. So looking forward to learning from everybody on here, my fellow panelists, and answering any questions that I can.
Should I go ahead and round this out? Okay. My name is Matt Pfeil, class of 05, and I do apologize. I'm in a small condo and there's a baby potentially crying in the background, so I can't shut him up. And he's probably my latest startup, I guess is the right way to say it. But out of school, I joined an early stage startup that did email hosting for small business before Gmail existed, actually in Blacksburg. That was a fun ride because we went from 10 people to selling it to a company called Rackspace in 07, and then they went through a public offering in 08. So in a period of 3 years, we had sort of this roller coaster of a ride. In 09, I moved to Austin, Texas, and met a guy there and started a database company called DataStax. Actually, so I need to get out or not? Sorry, I told you this was going to happen. And at that company raised about 250 million lifetime. It's still in existence today. If you use Spotify or Netflix or something like that, there's a pretty good chance that companies such as those store virtually all their data and software that we sold them. I left that company in 2017 after about an 8-year ride, mainly because I just was in my early 30s and realized I was sort of sick of doing databases. So I took a year off and then did a startup that was focused on business travel and using AI to sort of do it all for the business traveler. And then COVID hit. So we put that on hold and I've been unemployed for the last year. Although I guess retired is what my friends say, but I am a part-time VC on the side. So I know someone mentioned that they went to the dark side in the MBA. I view the VC side as the evil side, but that keeps me busy a few hours a week right now.
Oh, that was a great introduction, Matt. Actually, let me start off with the first set of questions we've got. So one of the things with the startup is it always appears to be this big daunting thing that you're going to take on. You're going to take on building a product, building a team, building a company out of it. And so how do you get over the fears that are related to possibly failing in that, and possibly even bringing a bunch of friends down with it? This is something that I think everyone goes through at one stage or the other, and the panel's perspective would be great on this. And Matt, since you're very recently through startups multiple times, can I start with you?
Yeah, so I think there's probably two parts to how I view that. One, especially if you're younger, like in my case, I had my first kid, in my late 30s. So your 20s are like a great time to do a startup because you have basically like no commitments. So if you fail, who cares? Because like you'll learn a lot. And actually half the time, if you go through a failed startup, a big company will view you as more valuable anyway. So like you'll get a better job, even if you fail, than if you had never tried at all. And the overarching mantra I would probably keep in the back of my head is, if you make a baseball analogy, Hall of Famers bat 300. And so that means that they miss on roughly a 2-to-1 ratio. Startups are probably more like you're wrong 9 times for every right time, or more even. And so like, just, practice makes perfect. Just embrace that and it'll be okay.
Well, that's a great answer. Mary, you've run a startup for a very long time. What's your take?
Well, a couple of things I would just say to our listeners. Number one, I think you have to define failure. And so I didn't want to leave Virginia Tech. I wanted to leave Virginia Tech, start my company, but I didn't want to leave Virginia Tech. And somebody finally helped me think about what would failure look like. And for me, it was kind of like not giving this a real effort and to see how it would work out. So I think you need to define what failure looks like and what you're willing to live with. The other thing I would say to people that are thinking about this is you don't need to go it alone. I think you need to try to reach out and collect people around you that can help you avoid some of the potholes that are pretty obvious if you've gone down that path before, but it's not obvious at all if you've never been there. So I was incredibly lucky early on with some really outstanding mentors, and I learned really quickly. I wasn't afraid to ask questions, even if they sounded like I should know that, but what would you say? So number one, I think there's a lot of help out there. And if you really want to be entrepreneurial, even if you don't start a company, I think the entrepreneurial spirit, you just can't deny it. You're always trying to solve problems and look ahead. So I would say to people, define failure. And number two, don't go it alone. There's no need to go it alone. There's a lot of people today that wants to help.
That was a great answer, Mary. Rajat, you've run through startups too. Multiple. So
Yeah,
what's your take?
I would say, I want to come back to what Matt said. In some ways, your risk profile is a little lower. It's a little bit better if you start off in your 20s. On the flip side, if you're in your 30s or 40s, even then it's really good, because hopefully by then you've made something of your life. You have that career experience behind you. So you go take a shot at, building something of your own. If it doesn't work out, the tech world is very, very forgiving. You get brownie points for trying. So, with that track record behind you, it's not very tough to kind of, pick yourself up again. And if you really want to kind of go on to a next startup, all good. If not, you want to go back to a corporate world, the world is very forgiving. And in my experience, you actually get brownie points for even trying. I think the other thing I would say is the mindset you need to take is focus on the journey. All right. So it's something you've never done before. If you're a first time entrepreneur, give yourself a year. And then, in the entrepreneurship world, there's this saying about failing fast. A year is a long, long time in the life of a startup. Before you get to the end of that 12 months, you'll know whether it's worth it for you to invest another 12 months of your life, or if you need to start packing up. So when I did my first startup, I just bought a house. I had a baby on the way. And my boss, who was a fellow alum from Wharton, who had hired me, he was like, "You must be crazy." Right. And I told him, "Look, I'm going to give it 12 months. And at the end of it, I'm sure I can fall back on my Wharton MBA degree and my Virginia Tech computer science degree, right? What could go wrong? So I would, yeah, I think that's my take on it.
Thanks, Rajat. So here is a question for the panel as a whole. One of our listeners asks us, so if I have an interesting idea, how do I exactly need to proceed to test my idea out on the market? Because an idea which is interesting to me may not be interesting enough for others to actually spend money on it. So essentially, what is the gist of product market fit?
Well, I'll just jump in here for Virginia at the moment. Number one, you got to ask a lot of questions. You got to really learn to listen, and you've got to seek out and ask questions. If you think you've got a solution in the marketplace, you need to go to talk to people who actually might use your solution. And so you've got to understand what their problems are, not what you think their problems are. So I think there are significant ways for you to begin to gain more information about whether or not you're going to have a product market fit. Also, right now in the state of Virginia, if these people are located in the state of Virginia, there's a program called I-Core that is free for any company to go through, and they actually walk you through the process of helping you understand product market fit and guiding you along the way. So if you really are serious about trying out an idea, I might encourage you to invest the 6 weeks, a day or two a week, to take a curriculum, to work with some experts across the state, to actually begin to figure out, are you onto something, and would the market care if you could solve that problem? And so that's what I encourage someone to do, is take advantage of what's around them. I would also just add one more thing. I don't think that build, show, and hope is the strategy that you should take. That's where you can kind of go down the road. You can go too far building and then show it to your friends who are never going to say anything negative, and then hope that everyone will love it. That's not the best strategy. So build, show, and hope is not the strategy. That I hope that there's better strategies than that.
Matt or Rajat?
Yeah, I'll chip in. So I think for an entrepreneur starting out to build a startup, product market fit is something that you shouldn't be thinking about at all, not in the early stages. So Matt can probably expand on this since he's a VC. Typically, as stages of startups go, you're really starting to focus on product market fit in a Series B, maybe Series C. A startup remains a startup until the point you found product market fit. The minute you find product market fit, what that means is you've got a product that people want to buy. You've got people or consumers who want to buy that product, and there's a business model that appeals to everybody. So if you crack product market fit, you're no longer a startup. Then you just bring armies and armies of people, and you really scale the heck out of the company, right? So I think the early stages, what you're really trying to figure out is there a big enough problem that a lot of people care about that you can try and solve? And I think that can be tougher than it sounds, but I think there are cues that you can draw upon. So one of the things you can look out for is are there big, large companies fighting over these issues? Are they pouring tons and tons of money into it? And that space is hot. There are lots of people who care about it. The big guys are pouring tons of money. And what happens is when big companies are like these huge tectonic plates in the earth, right? So when these companies clash around a strategic space, it's almost like two tectonic plates clashing, and all these fissures start to emerge, right? And those fissures are opportunities for a smaller, nimbler, more agile startup to enter one of those fissures, embed themselves in there, and then start to expand. So I would say finding that space is more critical than finding product market fit.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on to that is I think it's very easy to fall in the trap of focusing on the solution, because that's sort of like what you're building and it's sexy. But a lot of times people haven't fully focused enough on, and when I say people, I mean entrepreneurs, don't spend enough time focusing on what problem they're trying to solve is very explicitly, who has that problem very explicitly. Like, is it a big company that has a problem? Is it a small company? What's the explicit role of the company that's got it? Or a consumer, blah, blah, blah. But when you focus more there, because I found in my experience, if you nail really understanding the problem, the solution to the problem actually becomes very evident. But if you're spending a lot of time on the solution, it's usually a symptom that the problem is not fully understood. To Raj's point, that can take time to, it's not necessarily an overnight thing that someone understands the problem immediately. It could take quarters or years even in that search for the solution then.
So one of our other viewers asked, so Mary mentioned earlier, not knowing what the potholes might be along your journey as a startup, so what are some of the unexpected potholes that you face over there? Any examples that you have?
Do you mind repeating that? I'm sorry.
Sorry. Mary had mentioned earlier when we were talking about, how do you get over the fear of failure when you decide to start a startup? And along the way, as you're building this startup, there are potentially potholes along the way. So what are some of the unexpected potholes that you see or that you ran into?
So you're going to run it, I mean, as a quick, go ahead, Mary.
No, Matt, go ahead. You take it and then I'll jump in.
I was just going to say that I think that it's very rare, I think, that people get everything right the first time. So then what you're really describing is like, how do you build a system where you're wrong, but then can react and it's okay at the end? And so usually the work itself is not necessarily hard. It's the mental side of people are either scared of failing or, constant failure or something that grinds on you. There's no secret there other than, like, honestly, practice makes perfect, in my opinion. Like, if you're scared of failing, just go fail a lot until it's not so bad. At some point, you'll figure it out. Like, I was a very big introverted person in school. Like, I was very scared to talk to strangers. And when I moved to Austin, I remember telling myself, like, I don't want to be this way anymore. And so every time I got in a cab, I would strike up conversation with the cab driver. And, like, it was really awkward for me for probably the first, 2 years of doing that. But, like, eventually at some point it kicks in that, like, hey, I've done this enough times. I sort of know what to ask. I know how to feel afterwards. I know what not to say. And, like, just replicating that mentality has worked for me of, like, just bulldozing through constantly until you figure it out.
So, Matt, I'm going to jump in on that. One of the things that we do with the companies that we work with is run them through the DISC assessment. They need to, but Matt just demonstrated that he had a lot of self-awareness. Sometimes founders and partners, if there's a couple of founders that are going together, they really don't know what their magic sauce is, what their strength is, and what their weaknesses are. And so it's rare that we're good at all things. And so understanding, having the self-awareness of where you really, you can run into trouble all over the place. You can fail to keep good books. You might not be able to track your money. You may be creating code that won't scale. So because you think you can just write it, or you may actually. I started a company in Blacksburg, Virginia, and I had no clue that they had the B-poll tax. I didn't know I had to buy a license in Blacksburg that was based on, I had to estimate a year in advance what my receipts would be, not what my profit was, but my receipts. And it really so not knowing what you don't know. I had an advisor once, a mentor once, that said there's two things that will kill you. One is running out of money and the other one's running out of energy. And there's a lot of initiatives right now to help founders understand themselves and take care of themselves. You just can't drive yourself into a ditch and where you're not thinking properly. And so that's where I think mentors come in, asking for help and having a very high level of self-awareness of what do you know and what don't you know. And there's just so many ways to jump in a pothole. And but the trick is, if you get in it, you got to get out, right? It doesn't have to wreck you. It might shake you up a little bit, but it doesn't have to wreck you.
So the next question says, how did you decide to work full-time on your startup? Was there some particular impetus that led you that way? Any personal milestones once that you were full-time that you needed to hit in order to keep going? So let me start with Mary.
Well, I was hesitant. I think I told you that. And there were a lot of people trying to say, look, you've got these contracts, you've got these contracts. So I actually, when I opened my door and left the university, I took some of my staff with me and I had contracts in hand. And it was somebody at Virginia Tech that said to me, Mary, you can always come back. And so I began to believe that I had a safety net, that if this didn't work out, I actually might be able to go back and do what I was doing. And so I think you do have to figure out where your safety net is. Just this week, I was working with an entrepreneur in our region who is really moving forward, has received a bunch of money and investment. And yet I found out that he's holding a side gig where he's doing programming on the side to make a little extra money. And it's kind of like, you just got this huge grant and I'm not going to tell you when the time is to jump in, but there was a phrase that somebody said to me, there comes a point when you have to hold hands and jump off the bridge and hope the water's deep enough. Because if you're always just wading in, you may really be, time is not your friend as an entrepreneur. You're not the only one working on trying to solve this problem. I mean, I think you have to weigh everything. And so there's a point at which I think you have to hold hands and jump off the bridge and believe and hope that the water's going to be deep enough. And I finally just did it.
So Matt, you did this in your 20s directly. So what's your take?
Yeah, my route was I worked at an early stage startup first. I personally think that's and I know this is selfish because it's what I did, but I think that's a wise path to go because startups are hard. So getting to learn before you have to do it all, especially if you're 22, is, in my opinion, a nice way to ramp up into it. And for me, when I then started one, I knew at the first one, I was like, because I was the deputy CTO and worked for one of the co-founders, and we shared an office. So like, he was very hands off in the sense that we would sit, listen to calls, and then at the end he would say if I was doing the work or he was doing the work. So I really got exposed to a lot, and I knew in my early 20s I wanted to be in his seat at some point. So it was more about waiting for the right opportunity than the question of if I was going to do it. I made the jump when I was 27, and I mean, I remember thinking about like, what else am I waiting for? Like, there's never a perfect opportunity to do these. It's not like someone's gonna be like, hey, if you do this, you're guaranteed success or anything. So you just have to, if you have a co-founder, make sure you think they're the right co-founders, make sure the market's big enough as a potential outcome, and then just go. And I think Rajat said it earlier, but like, and I'm going to steal the phrase he used around how the tech community is very forgiving. Failure is viewed very nicely compared to some industries. And so like there's really not that much downside of doing a tech startup, as long as you do it in a moral way.
I'd like to add one thing as people think about this, and Matt, it plays on what you said. There's a study out that talks about startups that are more likely to be successful, and they track them over a long period of time. You can start a startup at any age, but there's 2 ages that over the last 7 years have been slightly more successful than other ages. One is 32 and the other one is 62. And when you dig into those numbers, Matt, at 32, you've had enough experience that you've learned in some way and you finally think you're going to give it a shot. At 62, you've been wanting your whole life to do this entrepreneurial thing. Maybe you finally got your kids through college. Maybe you've saved a little nest egg and you finally say, before it's over, I'm going to give this a shot. So 62 and 32 at the moment over the last 7 years have been really kind of the sweet spot but they're based around experience and having some kind of experience to start with.
Yeah, I actually, just to add on that, I remember talking to some of our past investors how the startups that are gigantic, like the Facebooks and Googles, are usually started by guys that are younger, but like that's such a minute number of all the startups out there. And actually the majority of the successful ones are started by people who are at least in their 30s. So the 20 something starting one and being successful is a rare case.
I think you're on mute. You're talking to us, but I can't hear you.
I just realized that. I was asking if Rajat had any more comments, but I have the next question otherwise.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add. I don't think there is any right milestone. I think what you have to look out for is you've got to be curious. You've got to be ambitious. You want to do something bigger than you've done before. And like I said earlier, I really think the opportunity cost is really low here. I really don't think that should be a consideration. I think there are a lot of people who decide to give up their jobs and do a startup, but for all the wrong reasons, right? There's a term called entrepreneur. So there are all these entrepreneurs who believe, either startups are glamorous or they're trying to escape a bad situation. And, I've never seen that succeed. But I think as long as you're fundamentally curious, you really want to do something different, you want to explore a new side to yourself, all of those are good enough reasons, and it doesn't really matter when you embark on the journey. Like I said, when I embarked on the journey, I was expecting my first kid and I just bought a house. So anyway, maybe that was foolhardy, but that's my philosophy.
I would say to that, you were highly motivated to do the work and be successful, right? So you had just bought a house, you had a child on the way, you were motivated to do the work. And so what did you say about, was that I just want to get the term, people that think that startups are glamorous?
Oh, entrepreneur. Somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur, but isn't really one. And I will add to that. When I embarked on this journey, when I did my first startup, I had no clue what I wanted to do. I quit my job, and the first 3 months I must have gone and talked to pretty much every company in the Bay Area, trying to figure out what is the core of their strategy, what is it that really matters to this company. And after 3 months, to Matt's earlier point, focusing on the right problem, I think you need to spend enough time upfront identifying the right problem to go after.
So the next question
and
asks,
you do that by asking.
Sorry.
No, I just said you do that. You find the right problem by asking questions and learning how to listen, right? So I love the fact that you said you met with everybody. It's learning how to ask questions and listen. It will help you figure out what problem, not that you care about, but that they care about, your potential market cares about. What problem do they care about? Not the solution. They care about their problems.
Excellent. So the next question asks, my aim is to get to an MBA from either Wharton or Harvard Business School later on. Does getting an MBA help one to be a senior exec or an entrepreneur? Do you have any advice for a computer science major who's planning to apply to top business schools in the near future around 2025? So Rajat, since you described that as the evil side transformation, probably should start this one.
Yeah, I would say if you can, everybody in the world should get an MBA. Particularly for somebody like me, I found it very, very valuable because I got exposed to things that I wouldn't have been exposed to if I just kind of, gotten my computer science degrees and continued in a corporate career with a large company. Now, having said that, I will tell you that an MBA has nothing to do with you being successful as an entrepreneur. Or maybe even a corporate exec, corporate ladder thing. I do think, particularly when it comes to corporate ladders, it probably helps you a little bit. But if you really think about what an MBA does, I mean, you spend 2 years of your life and like $500,000 learning about finance, about marketing, about sales, about go-to-market, operations, all of this stuff. When you come out of B school, you pick one profession. You say, okay, I'm going to go into banking. And then for the remainder of your life, pretty much, you focus on finance. So everything else that you read and learned over a period of time, you lose elements of that to quite an extent. I think on the flip side, when you're a startup founder, it's like doing a practical MBA all over again, right? So I had to learn how to do people management. I had to do strategic business development. I had to do partnerships. I even had to roll up my sleeves and go write code when I needed to. So I think an MBA is useful. It's not a necessary condition for being successful either at entrepreneurship or a large company corporation.
And Matt, what's your take? You've been through a series of startups recently.
I don't have a strong opinion on it, but from a pattern matching perspective, I don't know personally many entrepreneurs who got an MBA, but I know in the surrounding ecosystem, especially on the VC side, almost all of them did. And so, yeah, take from that what you will.
I'll add to that. So I think there are two kinds of people in the world. There are poets and there are librarians, right? Now the poets are the Elon Musks, and you've got the Zucks and all these folks. And I do think you need to be a poet for you to be a successful entrepreneur. I think an MBA teaches you to be more of a librarian. So a lot of these people, they do very well in like banking and consulting and VC and private equity and all of that. But I think you lose that poetic side to you when you get an MBA, or maybe you never had it, and that's why you went and got an MBA.
Any thoughts, Mary?
Well, I don't have an MBA, so I obviously didn't go that route. There were times I guess I wish I had, things I didn't know, but I began to separate services I could buy and knowledge I could go get when I needed it. So the difference is knowing if you don't know it all, then you need to be willing to ask the questions and go ask for help and sort it out. You're not going to know it all. I sometimes wish I had gone a couple more years, like you said, and got an MBA. It just wasn't my path. And I'm afraid if I had done that, I would never have gone on the other path, because I left doing something. It just wasn't in my path. But I certainly value some of that knowledge and was willing to go out and try to get that kind of help.
Really?
Srinidhi, can I add one more comment to that?
Absolutely, please.
I think specifically an MBA helps you a little bit more in a corporate career. And this is the reason why. I think having gone through that coursework, which is, pretty diverse, you're touching on everything. I think over a period of time, as you pick your field, whether it's marketing, banking, what have you, you lose whatever you had learned during your MBA. But what happens is there's an element that stays back in your mind. So as you grow in your corporate career, even if you're on the marketing side, as you grow, you're doing tons of people management, you're connected to the strategy of the company and so on and so forth. So when you hear things, when you get feedback from the market, as you look at competition, even if you're taking a look at your own operations and trying to make them more efficient, when you try to do a deep dive and you run into things, you're able to very quickly figure out what may not be as it appears. And you can because you have that association, because you went through 2 years of school studying about it, where to dig and what specifically to dig into. And then you can go find an expert in your own company or elsewhere and really get to the bottom of it a little bit quicker than you ordinarily would have.
No, really nice. So to follow up with, to a question that was asked a while ago, so you probably heard the phrase, you learn more from failure than success. And Rajat pointed out that the market is particularly in tech entrepreneurship, is quite forgiving. And across VCs, yes. This is actually one of the questions that shows up in any of those VC pitches where there is one less than stellar company in the background. What did you learn from it? So at least I'm not paying for your next mistake kind of question. So can you give an example of where it rang true for each of you? So let me start with Rajat here.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm being completely honest about this. I think maybe I'm over the hill at this point, so I've begun to be a little bit philosophical. But I truly don't believe that failure as a term really has a definition. I don't believe failure really exists, because I do fundamentally believe that you walk away from any situation benefiting from it. So I think, to me, failure is a particular outcome you had in your mind that you were shooting for, and the outcome you arrived at was different from the outcome you were shooting for, right? So I'll give you an example. With my first startup, I ran it for about 4.5 years. Had an exit with Google. Google bought us out. a decent exit, but frankly, it wasn't the valuation I could have gotten had I exited at the right time, right? And for me, the learning there was, I think I had my own gut feel and my own sense of conviction, but I also had a lot of advisors that I used to look up to. And ultimately, I took the advice of some of these advisors who had a lot more experience than I did, right? But then looking back, I had to take ownership of the decision I made. I decided not to exit at the peak. I exited at a time where the valuation was a little bit lower. So one, I learned that I needed to take ownership as the founder and the CEO of that startup and really make my own calls. And two, have faith and conviction in your own abilities, right? While all these people who are your advisors and mentors and all of that, they've seen success and they have experience, they have it in their own context. You are the subject matter expert when it comes to your startup, your market, your product, your customers, all of that. So I think a big lesson for me was have more faith in yourself.
That's a really interesting thought. Matt, what's your take?
I think I agree with mostly what was just said. I think the only thing I would add on, and someone sort of mentioned this earlier, but like, you're never going to get it all right the first time or the second time. And as long as you sort of like take that under assumption that's your entire life, like, trust me, I'm wrong with my wife on a daily basis, right? Like I don't think I'm ever going to get it 100%. Like, and I expect by the time I die, hopefully, 50 years from now, whatever, that I'll be wrong every day then as well. But I think the key is like, just never stop learning. And what you're really trying to do is like build systems, even if it's just for yourself, so that even if you get it wrong, it's okay. And you optimize for the best potential outcome. So yeah, I mean, Raj just sort of said this, but like, I don't view failure as a bad thing, or even as long as it's not viewed as absolute. It's like, it's only failure if you quit, right? So. Oh, I think you're muted.
I was just saying, Mary, did you have something to add to it?
Well, I certainly made a lot of mistakes. And I think, sometimes entrepreneurs define their mistakes as failures. I made lots of mistakes. Early on, I made someone a partner in the company against my lawyer's suggestion. I gave away a third of my company because I wanted to show this person I thought they were a key employee. And within 18 months, she had quit and was demanding a fair amount for her stock. And so I look back at that. It was a big learning experience for me. I had not listened to my lawyer saying, "What are you doing?" And I thought, no, don't worry, I got this. Well, I didn't got this. But the thing I would say to our listeners is that you're going to make mistakes. You don't have to let them bury you. And so I think our other speakers have said that you're going to make mistakes. So set your expectations. You don't want to make the same mistake twice. You want to figure out what you're learning, and you've got to keep moving. It's momentum. And so very few mistakes are fatal mistakes. You're probably not going to go out of business tomorrow. You might not be happy, or you might lose a key employee, or things happen. They just happen. But if you're kind of you can put it behind you. I used to use the football analogy. I absolutely love a losing team where the coach comes out and says, well, we didn't do our best, but we're going to look forward to next week. And it's kind of like, okay, we could learn a lot from that mentality, but most of us are harder on ourselves than that. And we kind of beat ourselves up. So I just think you make mistakes, you're going to make mistakes. What are you going to learn from them? And you got to keep moving.
Thanks, Mary. So the next question asks, what is something you wish you would have done or known before diving into your first startup? What was that big aha thing that came up that you wish somebody had told you before? So
you said the first
Matt?
Startup?
This would likely be your first startup, yes.
It's funny because I don't think I ever wish I had gotten an MBA, but like, I wish I had all the knowledge of the MBA. So for example, I wish I understood finance in a startup before I started my first startup, because like, and I don't just mean like profit and loss, but like true financial planning is like the core of a company in terms of everything. And so I wish I had known that going in. I think I wish I had known more about some basics around how you measure product market fit, some basics around go-to-market strategies and how to think about those, which I'm assuming this is all that's covered in MBA school that I never got and I learned the hard way. Yeah, maybe like an intro to startup. So maybe the right way to say that is go join someone else's startup that has some of these things figured out, but then spend time with all the departments that aren't just yours. Like take the seat. To Raj's point about the tech world being forgiving, it's also incredibly open and sort of friendly. So it's very easy to take someone out for coffee or beer and just pick their brain. I wish I had taken out department heads at that startup and like spent 8 hours just understanding how they think about their jobs. And like, because at the time I stayed really focused in the engineering box. So maybe that's my biggest regret is I wish I had spent more time in other departments before doing it myself.
Rajat?
Yeah, I would say I don't know that there was anything in particular that I hadn't heard of, that I heard about for the first time after I'd started my startup. But I think really internalizing what those things really mean and how do you act when you get into those situations. So as an example, I mean, most people have probably heard this. It's inevitable that you are going to pivot. So you're going to go in with your startup with a particular idea, and it's inevitable you're going to pivot. And where you come out at the end of your journey with your startup may be a very, very different thing than where you'd entered the journey with, right? So now, so I think everybody's heard of it, but when you're actually living that life, doing your startup, knowing when to pivot, when not to pivot, am I being foolish in making this pivot or this really, yanking and kind of turning in another direction? Is this the right timing? Should I wait? I think all of those are tough questions. And I think just going through those things that you've already heard about, but actually putting them into practice and you being responsible and accountable for it. And even worse, if you have a team, now you're yanking the entire team with you. I think that's the exciting part. And frankly, there's a lot of learning that comes from that no MBA program in the world will give you.
Mary, any thoughts?
Well, I made so many mistakes and things that I wish I'd known. I will tell you a mistake I made early on. I went into business with, ironically, clients in hand that were waiting to hire me. And so I went into business with that. I didn't have the MBA. I made some early mistakes, and this is going to sound funny, not understanding my cost of overhead and my real burden rate. And so it seems it was just a calculation of understanding what the real cost of business is, so that you're bidding your product appropriately, so that the bid product appropriately. I made some early mistakes and that they didn't last too long because it started hitting me, and I got some help in understanding my total cost of operations and my burden rate and all my overhead costs. And I finally really got a handle on that, but that wasn't my natural way to think about it. And so there were those kind of mistakes of just lack of knowledge. And I certainly wish I had known a little more about that going in. The other thing someone did say is that I wish I'd trusted some of myself a little better. There were times that I didn't know, even in writing contracts and getting payments and things that I got much better at over the years, and negotiating deals. There were things that I didn't realize were negotiable and that they actually are negotiable. So there were a lot of things that I learned over the years that turned to be really valuable.
So here's one question that comes up pretty often. How do you get funding? Like, what are the avenues today that are available? And for startups, this spans the whole gamut. So what are some advice that you might have for young entrepreneurs?
Take as little money as possible to prove an idea. Like, man, I have friends who have done multiple startups are successful. And one of them, for his first round of financing with nothing more than a pitch deck, raised like $8 million. And a year later, he was like, I wish I'd taken less. Like, this, So usually when you hear the VCs take less, you think it's because it self-serves them. Like, break down your problem set into like very small steps, take as little money with like a buffer to achieve that step, because it is such a slippery slope to raise a lot of money and then spend it when you don't need to. So I think for most people doing their first one to prove an idea in software in today's days and age, need somewhere between 250 and 500 grand, if I was guessing, to hire a few people and not pay yourself a lot. Like, start there.
Rajat, you're in the Bay Area, mecca of tech capital. So what's your take? Oh, I think Rajat, you're on mute, I believe.
Sorry. Yeah. So I think there are multiple avenues, and you could go the traditional VC route. And in the last few years, we've seen that flatten out quite a bit, not just in the Bay Area, but multiple areas around the US, and even frankly, different pockets of the world. So what that means is, you will see these micro VCs and funds pop up all over the place. So these are super angels, high net worth individuals. They pool their money together and they're willing to offer it. There are instruments like SAFE, which the Y Combinator popularized. And essentially, it's like a convertible note. And there's no valuation in the company, so you're not giving equity upfront. You're essentially borrowing some money with a promise to return it. And when a valuation for the company is set in the future by means of a VC round or liquidation or whatever, they get a discount on it. And I think it's fairly, I think there are lots of startups vying for money, but I think compared to what it was like to raise money like 10 years, 15 years back, it's a lot easier now, particularly if you're trying to raise an angel fund to just get off the ground, like $500,000 or $1 million thereabouts. Then, of course, there are the more traditional route. You can actually just do a friends and family round and then go to a VC. If you really have something compelling, you can just go directly to a seed round with a VC. And then there are options in between. There are plenty of accelerators and incubators that you can join. And you'll get a little bit of free office space, you'll get some mentoring. But the most prominent value of these accelerators and incubators is you come into contact with their network. It's like a little ecosystem around that accelerator and incubator. So, your first sum of money as you exit the incubator or accelerator, you'll probably get a few $100,000, and that's another way to kind of do it.
I never went that route, but I think if you're doing something for the first time and you haven't joined a startup before, I actually think it's a really, really strong way to go, because you're just surrounded by not only trained professionals who are there to help you succeed, but other people going through a similar journey. And so you'll build a strong network of people that, you can stay in touch with throughout the years.
And that's how I started my startup. I joined an incubator called UWeb. And as part of that incubator, it was a 1-year program. So I gave myself a year. I got a $60K annual salary with some basic benefits that weren't great, but I didn't have to worry about, my medical bills for the most part. And I started in Feb, and in September, I'd released my first product. And within a year, an hour and a half of me releasing the product, I had about 50 companies on the phone with me. So I knew this was going somewhere. Right. So by the time December came around and that 1-year period was coming to an end, there were plenty of super angels in the valley who were willing to, write a $50,000 check, a $100,000 check. So I raised about $500,000 and spun the company out of the incubator.
Any thoughts, Mary?
Well, I want to first of all thank Matt for his comment to not take money unless you really need it. So it's sometimes it's counterintuitive to a young company. It's like, ooh, they're offering me all this money. Ooh, I could get all this money. And the reality is you're giving up something for that money. The other thing I would tell you that not all money, it may be green, but it's not all the same. And so you need to look if it money is very different and across the regions. And you all were talking about angels and there's a lot of more money today than there has been, but there's also more grant money coming out across the states or accelerators like I'm running. So, $20,000 isn't a lot of money, but it might help you with something. But the more impressive thing is the people I bring to the table to meet you, who want to watch what you're doing and want to know what you're going through. And then the Commonwealth, Virginia is starting some funds right now, grant funds at $50,000 and $100,000. If you're really onto something and trying to find your way around it, you can piece some money together to really help you just kind of keep going until you can solve some of the harder problems. But I really encourage people not to take money unless they're ready for it, unless they really know what they need, and not to take more than they need. So that requires a very thoughtful process. It's not a badge of honor to give away most of your company for a lot of money that you really, and they don't hand you that check that you don't get to put it in the bank. You watch what they do with that money, right, Matt? And you want to see returns on that. So it's different, and you want the right partner who can help you. So I don't know. I know Matt's got a lot of experience. If I was a young company today and I'm talking to VCs, or if I'm talking to people, I want to match up with somebody who can bring me more than just money. So Matt could bring a lot to the table, given all of his experience. Come on, Matt, in addition to money. So the reality is you've got opportunities. You want to see what you're getting in addition to the cash.
Interesting. Very good point. Very good point there. So the next question asked, when finding people to work with, how do you assess if they're going to be a good asset for you? How they work with you? Who would like to start?
So this is just sort of on hiring in general, right? Like,
yes, or not just hiring, even when you're looking at partners, for example, going into a startup, doing something together.
so like a co-founder.
Something like a co-founder.
I'll leave this one open for now. My mind was somewhere else completely.
Rajat?
I can take a crack. So I think both for your co-founder and your founding team, which is the first set of people that you hire. Typically when I'm looking for people, there are 3 or 4 things that I look for. But in particular, when it comes to startups and your founding team, regardless of whether they have the co-founder title or not, I'm looking for 2 things over and above everything. One is raw MEPS. We have a genetic, so hopefully we all understand that term, but raw processing power, right? Which is, can I process, can I understand what's happening in the world around me, right? Can I very quickly get concepts? Do I have not just high IQ, but high EQ? Can I really wrap my head around the context of everything that's going around me? So that high raw intelligence, that's number 1 for me. Number 2 for me is attitude. Because like I said earlier, no matter what you think you're going to do with your startup, you're going to pivot. You're definitely going to pivot. So you want somebody who brings the right attitude to work, right? Because having the right set of partners that you're going to, by the way, spend 20 hours a day working. So being surrounded with people with the right attitude, who bring their best passion to work, who are willing to roll with the punches, all of that, I think that's very, very critical. I think the other 2 things, frankly, are skills and some domain knowledge, but that to me are like a very distant 3rd and 4th. I think specifically if you're looking for a co-founder, then in particular, one other trait that I would add to that is, can you, the consulting word refers to it as the airport test, which is if you're stuck at an airport because your flight is delayed, can you stand to hang out with this person? So that's that. And the second is, can you blindly trust this person? I think those are 2 extra qualities that I specifically look for in a co-founder.
Mary, any thoughts to add?
Well, I will say when I was hiring people for my company, Rajat, I had the same, I always said I wanted to hire really smart people with a great attitude. When technology is constantly changing, I wanted to surround myself with really smart people. I did not, and I do not need to be the smartest person in the room. Why? I want to hire people even better than I am, right? So that was top of mind for me. The other thing I wanted was honesty also. In development, I need to know that you're going to be honest, that you're telling me the truth. If you said you did it, I think you did it. If you said the code works this way, I want the code to work that way. I don't want to uncover it some other way. So I really was into honesty, but and really smart people with a good attitude. But I will tell you that in early stage companies, founders, it's hard. You're like in a race. It's people don't always move at the same pace. In the last 4 years that I've been running the Accelerator, we almost always have what I call a divorce. So we almost always run into a company where the founders are going to split. And if there's three in one particular case, there were three, one of them clearly was not willing to do the work that the other two were willing to do. And it caused a lot of strife in the company. And so if you're coming to work every day and you're really investing a lot, but your partner's not, if you're just not moving at the same pace, so pace matters, and honesty matters. It doesn't get better over time. Resentment does not get better over time. If you have a partner and the two of you are resenting each other for some reason, you have to deal with it. It doesn't get better over time. So I have found myself in helping negotiate how can you move forward, and or how do you separate and allow one partner to have the some momentum. It isn't easy. But I think honesty matters, and being aware of what you might run into really does matter. It is not this fun ride where everybody sees things all the same at the same time. I will also say, though, if you have a partner, you and your partner should not always agree. They always say, I mean, if you've got a partner and you always agree, then one of you is not needed. So you have to be willing to have that thick skin and the honesty and the trust and the respect for one another, that you could move a company forward and disagree. Disagreement's a good thing, not always a bad thing, but you can't try to kill each other off secretly and think that you're going to move the company forward. So it is challenging. I think you've got to be honest about it. But as you begin to hire people, you really have to decide what it is that you're looking for and what kind of culture are you providing that you expect them to fit into. I like the fact that you need to like the people that you work around. It's easier that way. It's just easier.
So one last question that we have for the team. Do you absolutely need one or more co-founders? Also, how many engineers do you need to get the ball rolling? Anyone who wants to take it.
Say it one more. What was it again? I'm sorry.
So Matt, I'll just say that most accelerators publish the fact that they want 2 or more co-founders. And when people push back and ask us that question, why do you say that? It's kind of as if you need to have one other buddy on the journey with you. It's almost too heavy to do it all by yourself. So that's a stage when you can go beyond yourself and bring in someone else. I don't know if it's a founder or an employee, but it's a whole lot easier from our standpoint if you can at least convince one other person that you're onto something. And I'll let you guys take it.
So the question, Matt, was, do you need a co-founder at all in starting this journey, or and how many engineers would you need to get a ball rolling for a product?
Yeah, I think if you're doing it for the first time, having a co-founder is good, because it's so hard. Doing it on your own is just like incredibly difficult. And then on the engineer question, I think you can start with one trying to build like the bare minimum thing. It doesn't mean you're going to have the end all be all, but I don't know. I like starting very small and getting a proof point validated.
Rajat? Any thoughts?
I would generally agree. I didn't start my startup with a co-founder. I think the point is you need a partner, whether it's a co-founder or not. And inevitably that partnership you would get in a co-founder. I think I got by the first few months without a co-founder because I had a partner who was the chairman of the Accelerator that I joined. So I was able to have like strategic conversations with him. But yeah, I do think having a co-founder helps, but it's not a necessary condition.
Thank you very much, everyone. We reached the end of our questions to the panel. This was a great hour. I learned a lot too along the way. Thank you so much.